Thank you very much. You may have your seats. And so without much ado, once again, I thank you all for making time to be with us today. On your tables, we have 2 codes for scanning. You can scan and access the program. And as we proceed with the discussions and the presentations, you will be able to scan to access the reports. We will hear from our analyst today, who will help us demystify and unpack the budget numbers. But before then, I would like to welcome our country lead and head of programs, Daniel Ndirangu, to welcome us and set the pace for us. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. So I prepared a speech here. I won't throw it away, I'll read it because I don't want to miss something that was important for us to hear. My name is Daniel Ndirangu. I'm the country lead at IPF, and it's a real pleasure to have all of you. Thank you for honoring us. Special thanks to our chief guest, Honorable NDINDI, the MP for Kiharu. Kiharu is known for many things, a lot of them good, and we are happy that you have honored this invitation to help us discuss the 5th edition of the annual National Shadow Budget. So for those who are hearing the annual National Shadow Budget for the first time, I just want to paint a picture of what this product is and why it's important for us to engage and listen and participate in the process of the annual National Shadow Budget as a precursor of the budget that will be tabled in Parliament before April 30th in a few weeks, in a few days. So we are happy that you've honored our invitation. I'll be happy to dig into the report and engage with us as it were. So on behalf of IPF, I want to sincerely thank you for engaging us and for allowing us to utilize part of your morning for us to engage in aspects of public finance accountability and participatory budgeting. One of our key values at IPF is participatory budgeting. And we know one key pillar of sound public finance management system is participation. And it's envisioned in the Constitution and subsequent laws that citizens and stakeholders and actors will engage in the budget process, and this is one of the tools that we prepare to support that process. So what is this shadow budget? Is it just an opposing document? Is it inconsistent with what the national government prepares? The answer is no. The goal here is to do a very rigorous analysis in collaboration that is born out of partnerships with our key experts seated on this. Most of our key experts are seated here. So John Yangi, please join your fellow colleagues on that table. We have engaged key experts who are experts in different sectors from the trade, commerce, environment, GJ law, public administration, health, and such experts in the sector. So over the past 5 years, because this edition has evolved from the first initial product, this has become a critical voice that complements the budgeting process. The first version is not like the current version. We have improved over time. We have developed this as an alternative proposition that especially Parliament can use to critique or analyze and scrutinize the budget. The same for citizens. If you're interested in a sector, the main report has analysis and key questions that should be asking your member of parliament or your representative in parliament to answer or to respond to based on the sector interest that you have. So we have developed alternative propositions where possible to government budget priorities, because we've analyzed the performance, we've analyzed budget allocations, we've analyzed the outcomes, and we have critically looked at what the budget will be if it was supposed to deliver services effectively, efficient, and in an equitable manner. So this is not just a critique for the sake of opposition. That's not what we are doing here. But it's a contribution to public interest, technical depth, as I've said, our experts are bringing on board, and a commitment to transparency. For anyone who will not be able to access, any other budget-related document, at least ours is open source, and you'll be able to access some of the things that will be useful to you. So how do we achieve this? We have continuously reviewed key budget documents since the budget cycle started last year in August. So over time, from the budget review and outlook paper, the sector working group reports, the budget policy statement, and other policy proposals that have come along the year, we have continuously monitored what is happening. Then we brought on board experts who have helped us break down these for 9 key sectors, with the exception of one, for obvious reasons, the national security. Not much is known about it. We don't know either, so we didn't touch that. And then dug into those documents to critique them and looked at what budget allocations looks like, what sector priorities are, how other flagship policy documents say, like the medium-term, expenditure framework, MTP4, and also the Vision 2030 and other attending documents. So we've dug deep into those documents through our analysis. And so whatever we are presenting here today is a thorough, analytical, depth, well thought out questions that should be able to guide our reflections as we scrutinize the next budget. So why is this important? The context for us is these publications comes when Kenya public finance management system is facing intense pressure. There is a government trying to navigate a very complex balance between paying debt, providing services, and also honoring other obligations, like paying salaries and maintaining basic level of service delivery. So this landscape is very fluid. And so alternative voices that have different perspectives and different views should be welcome to help us navigate this complex fiscal space. Well, macroeconomic indicators have shown that Kenya has been quite resilient to external shocks. We must ask and take this a moment to ask whether this growth is translating into impact. We have a projected growth of 5.3% against the current 4.3 projected for 2024. The inflation is stable. The shilling has appreciated slightly against the major currencies, and foreign exchange reserves within the 4-month threshold. They're slightly above the 4-month threshold. But are these macroeconomic wins, do these macro wins raise more pressing questions? Yes, they do. Because we ask whether this growth is broad-based. Is it just being driven by some sectors or across all sectors? We have seen in our analysis that growth has been driven majorly by service industry and the agriculture sector. The manufacturing sector has been lagging behind, which has affected job creation and also raising more labor-related questions on how we are going to maintain the current labor force. We have a very huge youth bulge that do not have jobs. So if the economy is expanding in some sectors and not others, what is the implication of that? The second question we want to ask ourselves is whether this prosperity is shared across all income levels. The poverty report that was released in 2022 indicated that 4 out of 10 people live below the poverty line. So look at yourself, count up to number 4 if you're 10. 4 of you live below the poverty level. It's even serious that about 4 million Kenyans, are also what we call multidimensionally poor. Even if they were to spend every shilling that they have in their household for food only, they would still not afford it. Is that prosperity shared? That's the question we want to ask ourselves today. In the minds of ordinary citizens, they want to know whether the reforms that are happening in education, in health, in infrastructure, whether they translate into any tangible impact in their lives directly. Whether the education sector reforms and the education sector budget will be translated into outcomes, because we have seen in our analysis, and this will be presented by my colleagues, that the budget is absorbed at 100%, but the outcomes are still suboptimal. So what is going on there? Where is this budget being committed to? Are we prioritizing things that were not in the budget, or why do we absorb the entire budget and not meet the outcomes? And finally, is whether there are any tangible results from taxes paid to rebuild the public trust. This has been eroded over the course of last year, from when the finance bill was withdrawn. And we're asking whether there are any tangible results that we might realize from this process that is helpful to rebuild that public trust. And in conclusion, this shadow budget is not just challenging numbers. It raises questions that Kenyans are asking every day. It pushes us to shift the debate from just, this is the amount of money we have allocated, to this is what we've realized with the amount of money that has been allocated. It helps us to move from ambition to accountability, and from process to products, form and substance. And our ask this year is, we are recalibrating budget performance in the face of fiscal constraints. How can we better utilize the resources that we have? How can we have a direct response to the misalignment between budgetary allocations and sectoral outcomes? How do we see readjustments of budget expenditure when we have a shortfalls in revenue? How are those priorities done, especially through the supplementaries? So we thank you, I thank you all, and welcome you to engage with us. And we believe that this document adds, as part of the voices, many voices that citizens will have in the budget process. I invite our chief guest with the colleagues to use it to ask some of the questions that we hope should be asked to the sectors and to the National Treasury. I thank you all.
Great. Thank you very much, our country lead, Daniel Lirangu, for setting the pace into the discussions that is coming, for explaining to us the foundation or the underlying principles as to why we have developed this analytical product. I would like now to welcome two of our senior analysts, Ms. Veronica Ndegwa, and subsequently Bernard Njiri, our senior economist, senior analyst, who will now take us through the numbers, unpacking them one by one as we follow the conversations. Karibu.
Allow me to stand on the protocols that have been established. Good morning. As introduced, my name is Veronica Ndegwa. I'll be making the presentation alongside my colleague, Bernard. He prefers Bernard to Bernard. I'll be taking us through the macro and fiscal context, and he'll delve into the sector deep dives. And without repeating what our country lead has presented on in terms of the approach we have, and I hope we can have the slides up. Without repeating what you presented around our methodology, our theme for this year is recalibrating budget performance in face of fiscal constraints. And the goal here was to analyze budget performance, looking at key numbers and through a review of past budgets. And this we did through a thorough analysis of key budget documents, among them the control of budget reports, the budget policy statements, the sector working group reports, among other budget documents, for us to collect information, both non-financial and financial, and to allow us to make key recommendations on how we can better improve our budget performance. In addition, as mentioned, we consulted widely with the sector experts who are, as mentioned, are seated on this side of the room. And in our analysis, we also looked at the financial numbers against non-financial numbers. And the goal here was to link the budget allocations to performance by looking at key performance indicators. Our tech guy is setting up the presentation, and the goal here was for us to ask critical questions that we, in the cases that we were not able to answer them, then we can push them forward to Parliament so that when they are reviewing the budget, then we can be able to have improved budget outcomes in the coming years. Sometimes technology fails, but I hope this time around it will work for us so that we can be able to follow the presentation together.
Full screen.
Let's give technology a minute.
Pole sana. Endelea. Shida iko huko. Problem ni huko nje. Hapo kwa hiyo mitambo yao sio. Copies gani?
I think I will proceed as we try to run the slides. We apologize for that technology hitch, but we can start with the macro and fiscal context and outlook. And as mentioned by our country lead, the Kenyan economy has performed well and has been resilient in face of shocks. And we have a projected growth of 4.6% in 2024. And the government is also projecting that we are going to achieve a higher growth of 5.3%. But the 4.6%, while it demonstrates resilience, and especially because of the domestic risks and external risks that we were experiencing in 2024, it was lower than 5.6% recorded in the previous year. In addition, inflation, as mentioned, has come down. But in terms of looking at the numbers, finally with the right slide. I was talking about inflation. As mentioned, inflation has come down, and this has primarily been because of the central bank's operation that has lowered the MPC rates. But key to note within the inflation numbers, the food inflation remains high, and probably this could explain why we as the citizens, or what we like calling ourselves as the Wanjiku, have been saying that we are not feeling the impact of growth in our daily lives, and probably this is because the food basket remains, inflation within the food basket remains high, meaning food prices have gone up, and so affordability in terms of real incomes has gone down. The central bank rate has been lowered over the past few months, and it's now down to 10% from a high of 13%. And partly the reason it was raised was to address the inflation concerns, but then it had a consequence of lowering credit to the private sector, and we hope that going forward that we'll see banks reduce their lending rates to the private sector to unlock additional credit. Also to note is that the credit to the private sector has been declining, and so we hope that not the credit sector, sorry, the non-performing loans have been increasing, and so we hope that with a lowered rate, credit will be more affordable, and the ratio of non-performing loans will so decrease. In terms of growth, the Kenyan economy has grown at a higher rate than both the sub-Saharan Africa average as well as the global average, and the projection is at 5.3%. But in terms of sectoral composition, and as mentioned, our growth is coming mostly from the services sector. Our agriculture sector is expanding, but our industry, where the manufacturing sector is it's declining. And suffice to note, and especially in terms of fiscal implications, the agriculture sector is highly untaxed, and so maybe that's why growth has not necessarily resulted to as much revenue growth as would have wanted to see. This is what we mean. Growth, in terms of growth and the implications on the fiscal side, revenue underperformance persists. And historically, I think apart from one financial year, revenue has been below target, and this was in 21-22. And this is the year immediately after COVID, and so the government had a more pessimistic look. But looking at the outer years, we see the government has had a bit of optimism in terms of its revenue targets. And for the financial year 2024-2025, which is the base year for the 2025-2026 budget, we see underperformance in revenue, and this means that we are likely not to meet the target by the end of the financial year, and this is even after several revisions within the year through the Supplementary Budget 1 and Supplementary Budget 2. Then we also note that the underperformance has been recorded in two major revenue heads, VAT and income tax, and this could be explained by the growth numbers we presented, that we see a decline in growth in the manufacturing sector or the industry sector, and this means lower employment, lower incomes, and so probably people have reduced their consumption, and as a result, tax revenues drop. In terms of expenditure side and why revenue underperformance has been a problem, partly it is because we have not adjusted our expenditures within the year in line with revenue performance. Most of the time, we see upward revisions in revenues, even when the government has revised its own revenue targets downwards. And this, what graph shows, is revenue underperformance vis-a-vis expenditure and execution. So even when we have expenditure and execution, like in terms of the absorption rate is lower than 100%, the revenue and the performance is much higher, and as a result, we have in-year upward revisions in our fiscal deficits. And most of the time, our fiscal deficit outrun is usually higher than we initially budgeted. Here, the concern is that the government has revenue numbers, but does not adjust its revenue numbers to its expenditure numbers to align with the revenue performance. So what this means is that our fiscal consolidation plans have been delayed, and so we have there is a slowdown in the fiscal consolidation park. And this is clearly seen in the graph. This is what I was explaining, that the outturn in terms of fiscal deficit has been higher than initially budgeted. And it is expected that we are still going to have a higher than targeted fiscal deficit. This year alone, we have had more than 3 revisions in the fiscal deficit. We began at 4.3% after we, the citizens, rejected the finance bill. It was revised upwards to 4.7% with the explanation that the government was not able to adjust the expenditures downwards. But then again, a month or so ago, the fiscal deficit was revised upward again at 4.9%. And if history is to repeat itself, we expect our fiscal deficit to be above 5%. And so the 4.6% target for the financial year 2025-2026 remains a very ambitious plan. And we hope that the government will consider our inputs in terms of revising expenditures downwards whenever there is anticipated revenue underperformance. On the expenditure execution side, or the budget execution side, we also have many challenges, and we have flagged a few, and my colleague will be giving good examples of how different sectors have experienced these challenges in budget execution. So pending bills, I think at this point we run the risk of sounding like a broken record, because we have continually flagged the issue of pending bills. But the past numbers, and I want to focus on the county numbers, the blue bar, and especially the financial year 18-19, we saw a reduction in the pending bills from around 108 billion to 35 million. So with commitment, the government can be able to reduce the pending bills. And if I recall correctly, what was happening here, county disbursements were being pegged on their commitment to settlement of pending bills, and we saw them coming down. The question that is often asked is why we continue flagging this as a problem. First of all, this money is owed to the private sector that we saw is struggling to repay its loans to the banking sector. So at the end of the day, the government is tying up working capital for businesses, and so also affecting economic growth at the end rate on. And as I mentioned, it is possible for the government to settle pending bills, but the question here we are asking, because it is legally required for governments, both national and county governments, to prioritize payment of pending bills. So the question we are asking, what happened to that legal requirement that whenever there is a pending bill, why are we not settling the implementation of the subsequent year's budget? And important to note is that semi-autonomous government agencies or the parastatals account for more than 60% of pending bills. And this takes me to the parastatal reforms that are happening. And here we should review, and especially the parastatals that continue to perform functions that are more or less the same, how to restructure them and how to reorganize them so that then this problem of pending bills can also be addressed. Another key gap that we observe within budget execution, and this has been alluded to, it is in terms of mixed key performance indicators, even in cases where ministries, departments, and agencies receive 100% disbursement. From that graph, we see that only the governance, justice, law, and order sector had the highest level of achievement of KPIs, and this was at 59% of their KPIs were achieved at 80% and above. But key concern, and especially because we have a program-based budget, is that some of the programs or the activities that are budgeted for allocated resources and resources disbursed to fund them, there are no KPIs. This means that we cannot link the financial, which is the budget allocation and the disbursements, to the budget execution. And so this becomes a key question for the sectoral committees within the National Assembly to look at the key performance indicators and see how well they reflect the resources that they receive. Another challenge, and this has been consistently flagged by the sector reports, and this is terms of how disbursements are made from the National Treasury. This graph, the spikes we see are at the month of June, which is at the close of the financial year. What this means is that MDS do not have time to absorb the resources allocated to them, and so do not have a reason not to implement their budgets as planned. Then this is on the taxation side. Tax expenditures remain a critical that needs to be addressed, and from the graph you see they increased to 511 billion. And key to note is that tax expenditures are a government policy choice not to collect revenues. Some of them are justified, like, for example, the zero rating of basic commodities, but some of them remain to be inefficient and ineffective. Here, and related to the revenue performance graph that I projected, the highest number of tax expenditures are recording under performance. So in terms here, or in terms of a recommendation that we are making here, is for government to review the tax incentives within its tax framework, and a starting point could be the VAT Act. The number of zero ratings we had. But if you look at the history of the amendments to the VAT Act, the lists, the first schedule of the VAT Act continues expanding policy and the medium-term revenue strategy to rationalize some of these tax expenditures. And we hope that this will happen in the near future. Forward in terms of the budget for the financial year 25-26, we see an increase of 11% in the total budget, least increase in Parliament. This is a bit unexpected given the past history, and then we also have a minimal increase in county. And so, but of concern is consolidated fund services, and this does not include debt redemptions. This is just interest and salaries to constitutional commissions, and see an increase of 11%. Out of this, around 1.13 trillion is going to interest payments, and this is a result of increased borrowing, even at a time when we were promised that we'll be living within our means. In terms of sectoral changes, the health sector, and this came as a good surprise. We have consistently flagged inadequate allocations to the health sector, and especially at a time when there are so many reforms and commitment to universal health coverage. But for this budget, we saw a 72% increase, the only sector with a decline, and again we have been flagging this because it's mostly an administrative sector, that has institutions like the National Treasury, the State House, and other administrative functions within the government, so a reduction in its budget. But my colleague in his sector deep dives will show us which programs have been cut and which ones have not received a cut. And with that, I would welcome Ben Njiri to continue with the presentation, highlighting key specific sector challenges that we have flagged out in our analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Veronica. I have listened to both of you, and I feel and I'm just about to take off. Okay. So as we wait for that to be addressed, Dan has talked about how our economy has been growing. Poverty is taking longer than expected in terms of, coming down. I have listened to Veronica. We have a projected GDP growth of 5.3%. Actually, the next financial year, government is working with a 19 trillion GDP. And the reason why that GDP has to be put high is to bring down fiscal deficit to GDP. You are simply inflating the denominator. That basic mathematics. You are inflating the denominator to bring down fiscal deficit to GDP. But are we even likely to achieve the 19 trillion GDP in nominal terms? Veronica has touched on pending bills. It's worrying that when you read through the sector reports, we keep having pending bills with no provision. And you ask yourself, why should that be the case? If we have pending bills that have been audited, they have been verified and approved, why should we fail to have provision for those pending bills? And we have looked at the control of budget reports. The first half of the current financial year 24-25, pending bills at the national level stood at 706 billion. What would that translate into if the government was required to make a bullet payment? And remember, in the financial year 25-26, our development budget is 710 billion. So that means we would definitely suspend development and clear the pending bills. So we have to talk about this and hold the government to account and clear the pending bills. Then the other thing, Veronica has talked about the revenue numbers. In the draft BPS, government had projected a 3 trillion revenue. We raised that. It was brought down now to 2.8 trillion, the target. But surprisingly, expenditure was not touched. What does that tell us? We have a very disjointed fiscal framework. You cannot revise the revenue numbers down, but fail to touch on the expenditure side. So when I listened to that now, I started thinking like a pilot, okay? And I was thinking about the 3 weeds. We can have the tail weed, we have the head weed, and we can have the crossweed. And pilots always tell us that the crossweed, that's the most dangerous weed. And as we speak, I think in this country, we are experiencing a crossweed where we need specific pilot techniques. Because of where we are as a country, a very constrained fiscal space. And because of what we are experiencing, we have now taken our time as the Institute of Public Finance to look at the various sectors. And I will start by talking through how our budget execution and performance has a mismatch or misaligned. For example, let us start with the GECA sector, that is General Economic and Commercial Affairs. We have looked at just a few state departments for this presentation, but the main report has all the sectors, and we have looked at all the state departments. Here, we looked at how the budget is absorbed and the level of KPIs achieved, key performance indicators. And now, if, for example, you look at the State Department for Cooperatives, that State Department was able to achieve 89% of the KPIs by only absorbing 49% of the budget. Industry, you absorb 49% of your budget, but you achieve 71%. Same with MSMEs development, budget absorption 25, but the level of KPIs achieved 93%. Now, do these state departments offer project or offer budget but set fairly low KPIs? Because there's 93% of your KPIs. Okay? So what does that tell us? So can we conclude that the State Department for MSMEs development, can we say that it's so efficient, or this is an issue of a budgeting? And if that is the case, why should we continue to allocate more resources to such state departments? Because these are the same state departments we have flagged, okay? And now we, as the resource allocation, and we say, you know, for those state departments that were not able or that could still achieve their KPIs with less than half budget absorbed, we can free those resources, and they total 6.3 billion. We can free those resources and reallocate them to other critical problems. How programs achieve, set their targets, and whether they achieve them or not. And we have picked an example from the education sector. This is a state department for basic education. Number of primary school infrastructure renovated, the target was 40. There was 0% of targets achieved. Schools with renovated infrastructure, 210 target, 0%. Primary teacher training colleges completed, the government had targeted 10 in the financial year 23-24, but 0% achieved. At 226, but none was done. Number of laboratories. So what can we conclude out of this? It shows a systemic failure to effectively deliver on infrastructure projects, and that raises urgent concern about resource allocation and operational efficiency. The other thing that we have looked at is how functions are across various state departments. For example, if you read the sector report for GECA, that is General Economic and Commercial Affairs, MSME support for MSMEs, social protection, we have so many fragmented public-funded programs, or the cash transfer programs, and there was even a recommendation that these environmental protection, water and natural resources. Now this is where we have a big problem. We have the State Department for Irrigation. For water and sanitation, we have water resource management, water and sewerage infrastructure development. So state departments, it's so duplicated, and these are some of these functions are even performed by the county governments. So we have some programs and functions that can be targeted. We align our functions, we align at this time when this country is experiencing a very constrained fiscal space. And that now we are having crosswinds, and that is why we need specific pilot techniques to address some of these public administration and international relations sector, that is PAIR. We saw it had a budget cut of 8%. Okay? But we should not crap until we come now to the programs or the votes themselves. Okay? Where we see a high jump for top offices. But when you look at oversight institutions, the increase is not, as we would expect at this. The adequately funding oversight institutions, just to limit oversight on spending. For example, in the next, the Executive Office of the President, Office of the Deputy President, Office of the Cabinet Secretary, and the State House, those 4 offices will receive an increase of 5.4 billion. Okay? And you see, State House actually is set to receive a 75% increase in budget. But when you combine now the audit, the audit institute, controller of budget, commission on revenue allocation, those 3 offices, critical offices, they have an increment of 666 million. So when we say that the PAIR sector has a budget cut of 8% in the next budget, 25-26, it should be clear to all of us that the cut is not implemented across all the votes. Now, I want to talk about the health sector. We saw that the sector has an increase of about 75% in the next budget, that is 25-26. And this is because in the current budget, financial year 24-25, the health sector was allocated 118 billion. In the next financial year, the health sector is set to receive 204 billion. That gives us a 72% increase in the budget for the health sector. Then under the health sector, we have what we call the social protection in health. Social protection in health, that is where we have social health insurance fund. Under the social protection in health, the financial year 24-25, the budget was 13 billion. This is set to increase to 94 billion in the financial year 25-26. But let us note clearly here, the 94 billion that we expect to be increased in the financial year 25-26, under the social protection in health, 82 billion should come from A&A. Okay? It should come from A&A for social health insurance fund, and that is if the answer is no, and the answer is no, let me say it, the answer is no, because so we are not likely to achieve the 82 billion that has been allocated for social protection in health. So what do we expect? Are they likely to get health insurance? Okay, so don't health sector, now we are 4 months since the operationalization of the Social Health Authority, a benefits package and tariffs advisory panel. And the role of those two is to review and recommend, make recommendations of health benefits package and advise on fair pricing and tariffs for health services. We have experienced another challenge within the health sector, after the freeze order by the US government, and there is a looming donor exit. So that threatens critical health programs like TB, malaria, HIV, and AIDS. Okay? And if you interact closely with the various county governments, they tell you they have already started to experience problems with essential health commodities after there was that freeze order. So there is a need for us to talk, more about the health sector. Then, in the financial year 23-24, there was a decline in the sector's overall budget execution. Why? Because we cannot just talk about an allocation of 204 billion in the financial year 25-26 if we are not going to absorb all this budget. We are doing a disservice to the citizens by, just giving very good numbers. Yet citizens. So in the financial year 23-24, the State Department for Medical Services was allocated 105 billion, which was about 78% of the budget. And this is a decline compared to the financial year 22-23, where the budget absorbed was 87%. The State Department for Public Health and Professional Standards, it was allocated 29 billion health sector budget. It was able to absorb 87%. It was an increase, from the previous year, 22-23. Absorption rate or execution rate for the health sector came down in the financial year 23-24 to 82%. In its allocation with 0.8 billion, that is 800 million allocation towards social what I have said. Out of the 94 billion set for social health insurance fund in the financial year contributions. Goal number 2 is to promote sustainable access and affordability of quality essential health products and technologies. Health products and technologies. So the Kenya Biofax Institute under the Health Research and Innovation Program of the State Department however, this falls significantly short of its estimated resource requirement. Can you see that discrepancy? That, billion. So you can now see, if we could touch the budget that was allocated to the top offices and bring it now here, now that goal number 3, to improve access to health information and provide services through digitization of health services and interconnectivity in the health sector. Allocated 0.2 billion, that's about 200 million, and this is well below the estimated funding of billion. What does that tell you? Are government policies and priorities aligned with the budget? Because that's the only way we can assess. Goal number 4 is to improve human resource for health systems. A total of 1.7 billion has been allocated for doctors' salary under the return to work agreement, while 3.3 billion is set aside for 107,800 community health promoters. The health policy and regulation sub-program has seen a significant unexplained increase from 94 million to 4.2 billion. We recommend we appreciate where the government has done what needs to be done. We have also looked at the sustainability of the social health authority, and what the critical question here we are asking is, what is the realistic long-term contributions from the informal sector are not forthcoming. We all know the burden is being carried more by those who have to bring the informal sector to contribute. The other one is about donor transition planning. So as donors withdraw, what measures have been put to ensure sufficient domestic resource mobilization? And we can only get this right, the same way advanced economies are inward and think how we can optimally use our resources as a country without necessarily having to appropriate money. Programs, or we can have a budget cut. And before I invite my colleague and country leader, Daniel Diragu, I want times of fiscal constraint, a responsible budget is not just about numbers. It's about choices. Government must take Daniel Diragu. Sorry, I will come, Luke. Thank you.
A very warm round of applause to Bernard and Veronica for unpacking the numbers for us. And if where you're seated, you are not getting a heartbeat, that extra palpitation when you see something that catches your attention. If your seat still feels comfortable, please tell me and I will call them back to go through those numbers again. Because what we want to achieve out of these discussions is to spur discussion, is to ignite some fire in each and every one of us, to want to participate, to want to engage, to demand accountability. And I remember growing up, I used to imagine that I would not be an economist, but I would be a very senior chef. And so I used to be told that no matter how big your pot is, and no matter how nice and clean your fire is, you will not get the right mix of pilau if you do not have the right spices. And as my colleagues are speaking, you know, it just reflects back, because you ask yourself, we have these huge PFM reforms coming our way. But unless we fix the inefficiencies and the gaps, our continued call for fiscal consolidation, our continued call for reforms, our continued call for reorganization, restructuring, innovative financing, that need to be addressed. And one very critical component that we have ensured that we entrench in our analysis is that we not only look at the numbers from the forward-facing proposition, but we also look at past performance. We've taken time to examine what has been the trend in the past years, so that then we say, are we making headways? Are we heading in the right direction? Are there gaps that we need to address, even as we consider what are the next steps moving forward as a country? Now, with the insights we have had, I would like us now to proceed. Spark more or speak more about the numbers. And to start us off, I would like to welcome our sector experts, whose invaluable contribution in this analysis cannot be measured. I will ask some few questions for our sector experts to just help us demystify more or dig deeper or look into other perspectives that we have not covered in the presentations, so that then that paves way for a few questions before we welcome the country lead and our chief guest. So I will start with our very senior economist, academician, Dr. Njaramba. And economics. And Daktari, we want to start with the broader question, looking at fiscal. As a country, the past few years, we have spoken and called for clear path for fiscal consolidation. In our other analysis and in other spaces, we have asked the question whether our debt financing has been strategic, because we have borrowed with the intention to spur development. But when you look at the numbers, generally speaking, we've had stagnating growth with increasing debt numbers. On the other hand, has almost reached its maximum in terms of elasticity. Really, citizens now are on the edge in terms of being able to pay any more taxes. So we do not see opportunity for much expansion in terms of revenue reforms that we need to put in place. What are those things that need to be done? The key message that we can say as a group of citizens who are gathered here today, what can we call for in our fiscal consolidation, development pathways, and debt management? Karibu Daktari.
Thank you. Was that not an ambush? Eh? Now, my questions, or the questions that have come to me, I must declare that I'm going to respond with utmost respect in the room. That is our government leaders and the politicians. The questions, fiscal consolidations and the revenues. The fiscal consolidation was called upon, and I think around the year 1918, thereabout. And it is upon the request that the public sector, the government of Kenya, felt that it needed support, especially from the IMF and the World Bank, but of course conditions were given, and the conditions comes around now what we call the fiscal consolidation. The conditions therein, one of it is that the government need to reduce its expenditure. Number two is that the revenues that the government was collecting, which was about 13% of GDP, was too low, and therefore needed to something needed to be done so that it could increase. Now we come to the government of Kenya. Those are the conditions. The response to that is that they have been working not to respond to the domestic economy, but to respond to the donors. I think I have two answers. Of course, there are so many reasons. I thought I would actually talk and finish before Mheshimiwa come back, but unfortunately, he gets me in. Now, I'm saying that I have two answers that I want to give. One is that the reason why the government of Kenya is implementing fiscal consolidation with the vigors that they do have is to respond to the conditions. So eventually, what has happened is that we have what we are calling the targets, as has been presented to us, which do not match the realities. So most of the time, our revenues are over targeted, and every time we realize that our expenditures are under targeted. And for that reason, we have what we are calling pending bills. We have a situation where the revenues are not able, or most of the time are below 80% of the target most of the time, and they are declining actually over time, meaning we are even increasing in terms of missing the target. Number two is that our revenue, our expenditures most of the time are over targeted, and that's why we will see every now and then we have supplementary budget in order to review what we plan. So in the whole analysis, therefore, we have a situation where we are planning in order to look good. We want to reduce the budget deficit for purposes of our donors. So that's the first answer I have to the reason why we are not meeting the fiscal consolidation target, which I prefer to call them conditions. Now, number two is, of course, what we are targeting. In terms of fiscal consolidation, is that we want to reduce the expenditure. So the expenditure reduction, public expenditure reduction is on the wrong activities. It is on the wrong activities that I don't even have to explain much. We've seen the office of the president, where the deputy president is also part of it. The increment of over 5 billion increment in the next financial year. That is, of course, proposed. Now, you can actually imagine what was the increment last financial year, and therefore you can draw the trend. Surely we cannot be talking about fiscal consolidation when we have what we call areas of recurrent expenditure being the one expanding. And therefore, if we are seriously to talk about fiscal consolidation, is where we minimize, especially in the areas of recurrent activities, travelings and all that, and focus our expenditure on productive area, productive activities. Those are the two. Of course, there are so many other reasons, but I consider them the main. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Daktari, for demystifying what we need to do, and particularly bringing out the need to take a closer look and a deeper reflection on our domestic economy and what works for us as Kenyans. Now, I'd like to ask, I know we are running very tight on the timelines, and so I will invite Nyangi to speak, share some insights, particularly on health financing, but please limit it to 2 minutes max, and particularly reflecting on the numbers that we have seen and heard about the health budgets, and more so acknowledging that the dynamics of health financing cannot be overemphasized, cannot be overpronounced, because this is a burning issue that we have raised, has been discussed in different platforms. We are facing a couple of challenges. The budgets are not inadequate, are not adequate. Increase, yes, but it's not adequate. Donor financing on the haywire, reducing numbers. The contributions that were expected to come from the social health insurance have not reached the numbers as were desired. And so there's a quagmire. What are the quick wins that need to be put in place in 2 minutes?
Thank you so much, Ruth. First of all, the government has made very good intentions about universal health coverage, that everybody can access health without the background, whether it is their financial status, whether they're in the formal sector or informal sector, or whether they are able to pay for it or not. And that is why the only way to do that is through insurance. And so that is a good thing that the Kenya Kwanza government has brought into operation by ensuring that there is universal social health insurance. Everybody is in social health insurance. But now, through the presentation, we saw that there has been an 72% increase in health for budget for health. But look at where that is coming from. It is the expectation that that money will come from the premiums from the social health insurance fund, and that is not going to come through. Kenya borrowed this model from the Kingdom of Thailand, and what they didn't borrow is that the Kingdom of Thailand has 100% financing of the health from their domestic resources. Kenya has only 82%, and government is contributing only 48%, leaving 52% coming from out of pocket, from private sector, from external funding. So the most critical thing that needs to be done is to bring down out of pocket contribution, which at the moment is standing at 24%. And you cannot talk about universal health coverage when you have out of pocket anything above 20%. So we are doing 24%. We cannot do UHC with that amount of out-of-pocket spending. And when we look at these numbers for 24 and 25, it's going to be higher, because we have seen the strikes where this SHA has not been working. The public health facilities have not been attending to their clients because of the strikes. So Kenyans have been seeking health care from private health facilities, and they have been paying from their pocket. So we are going to see this one going up if we have the recent numbers, because 24% that I'm referring to is as of 2022, the numbers by the National Health Accounts by WHO. So what are the quick wins? We need to bring down out-of-pocket spending, and we need to have money from taxes that going into the health sector and paying for social health insurance. We had NHIF that it was 100% funded by the contributions. That is the same thing that we are seeing, that the social health insurance fund is again going to be funded 100% by the contributions. In a country like Kenya, where we have over 8% of the people in the informal sector, you cannot achieve the social health insurance by laying that burden on the people only who are in the formal sector. So no matter how much we want to bring money into the health sector, we cannot achieve that route if the government is not paying money into the health sector from taxes. Let's have out of that 82 billion, how much is coming from taxes that is going into social health insurance fund? If it's depending only on the contributions, how are they going to enforce that? They said we are going to do what? Make sure nobody is going to access public services unless they are contributing to the insurance. We have any registration is up, but what is the contribution? Contribution is very low. So we need to see that the people who are registered in insurance are contributing. And how do you do that? You don't again deny them services for them to contribute. That is the only way we can do what? We can meet the social health insurance. And then push government contribution to 15% of Abuja declaration, which they have contributed. We are at 5% of GDP and 7% of the national budget. We are not even half. So if we talk about social health insurance, we talk about universal health coverage. When we talk about the mouth and then when we walk, we have to align that. 15% of the budget, 7% of GDP, then we can see the out-of-pocket coming down, and we can see what we call universal health coverage being achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like the fire, the zeal, and the energy when we are discussing topical issues. Now, we are moving to the highlight of the day, where we will hear from our country lead, just a word, and he will welcome our chief guest and proceed to the launch. But I would like to welcome, he came in too fast before. Yeah, I'd like to welcome Ndirangu to lead us to the next step.
All right, thank you all for listening. Let's appreciate all. More time. I want to invite Honorable NDINDI to say a few things and reflections about what he thinks about this shadow budget and where we should get to bring this part of this agitation is coming to you directly because you are visible and you are close range. We also want to take this to the committee, so please point us to the right direction. Karibuni. Let's appreciate, applaud. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ndirangu, and the team from the Institute of Public Finance, and all the other guests. Good morning. I am very pleased to come here this morning. And when I came and people were settling, and my brother who just spoke about health finance just came in, and the moderator pointed that the experts were on that table. So I then think that since our table was just the neighbor of the experts, then we are not so badly off. But I'm very pleased again to be here this morning. I will say a few things not very structured, like the good presentations that we had, because I want to, as Ndirangu pointed, to just do a reflection, because as you are aware, I have been serving in the budget making process at the chairmanship of it, and therefore there are many things that I have seen and learned, and those are the reflections that I want to share. But you allow me, IPF, to maybe point some semantics, because some of us politicians, or in our career, semantics are as important as the embodiment of it. Maybe next time, instead of calling it shadow, we call it alternative, because in politics words matter a lot, because to a large extent we do a lot of talking also. As you could have also noted, when Dr. Jaramba answered the question that was asked around death, the heavy claps came from our table, because I had to visibly clap, and he had to see that I'm clapping. because he's my supervisor in the masters I'm taking in KU. So I hope the people taking the videos took me clapping vigorously. Probably that may help at some point. Thank you very much, Dr. Jaramba. He's been very instrumental in what I'm doing in KU. And as I said earlier, and I'm saying it because I see a lot of economists here, when we came in after elections, I thought that in the capacity which I was serving, that I needed to also entrench myself in terms of knowledge. And therefore, in the September of the ensuing year, which was 2023, I was very eager to start my master's. But because I had done my undergrad in KU, I thought the CV should read another institution. So I went and applied to the University of Nairobi. But because I was very eager, they delayed. When Nairobi HON starts their semester, it is 1.5 months before or after KU. And because I was very eager, I didn't want to waste any more minute. I applied in KU also because KU was coming pretty earlier, around August, September. So I enrolled in KU. But also, the time for HON also came after 1.5 months after that. So I enrolled in both master's degrees. One in public policy, the other one in pure economics in HON. And I'm glad that I'm actually done with my coursework. We are now doing the both projects concurrently. And I want to assure you I actually attended classes. And I'm not saying this because of myself. I'm saying it because I have realized as Kenyans, and especially those who have the privilege of serving Kenyans in public offices, to make optimal decisions, we need as much knowledge embedded in us as possible. Because you can rely on experts, you can rely on advisors, but they can only advise you on something you have familiarity on. And that is the reason why I am saying it, not in terms of boasting, but in terms of also encouraging any other public officer and also other young Kenyans that education, ukisoma haipotei, inasaidia pahali. As I start here, I start in terms of budget, but also as a leader. Because I'm privileged to be MP for Kiharu. And you'll keep forgiving me because, you know, that is my primary role as the Member of Parliament for Kiharu. So when you invite me many often times and I start with what we are doing in Kiharu, is because that is exactly my job. And since we are talking about economics, an optimal allocation is in national and also in the taxonomies that exists, and especially constituencies and counties. The same semantics we are learning about here, they also happen in the constituency level. And I am glad that where I represent, that is Kiharu, our focus was primarily first in the learning institutions. It's a pretty large constituency with 2 sub-counties. We have over 112 public primary schools. And I want to assure you as the MP for that area and as a servant, having worked alongside the people of Kiharu and together, all our public primary schools, in all the classes the learners attend, they are in appearance just as the academies that the children of those who have more means attend. And actually all our public primary schools are tiled, all of them, all classes. We also have in the same category or sector a program we call Kiharu Masomo Bora. And Kiharu Masomo Bora touches on learning in secondary schools. And out of all our day secondary schools, over 10,000 learners. There used to be much more, but because now there is no, there was no intake in Form 1, they are now a little fewer. So they are around 10,000. They only pay 1,000 school fees per term. And in that they eat in school from Monday to Saturday. And in the same program, we also provide learning materials like revision books. And also we have done infrastructure. Like this year alone, we are doing 10 laboratories in our JSS, which are used to be primary schools institutions, modern laboratories. and much more that we are doing. So whatever we are doing here also must reflect on the leader in the area that they have dominant influence. And therefore, it is important that we speak about these things, because the same things we are talking about here affect the people. The same thing we do in the constituency level affect the same people. And you could have also noted, probably because I highlight those things in my social media, rural constituencies have topographies that are not necessarily flat. And therefore, what we have been doing from my first year is that in very steep areas, we do concrete roads, so that once you do it, you actually do it for once and for all. Once we, for example, the concrete roads we did in my first year, there has never been any repair needed, because once you do it, you have done it. Other than putting gravel on very steep areas, then you have to do it after every rainy season. Now, getting to the issue of the day, I'm taking it up actually from there, from Kiharu, because, and actually don't wait for another technical speech, I'm already giving the speech. I learned one thing when I was elected as Member of Parliament for Kiharu in my first term. When you get elected and before people actually know your character, there is usually some friction before people define who you are. Because politics and leadership is also, to a large extent, part of making people know who you are, so that when you speak, they know who is speaking. When you say maybe something will be done, they know, do you mean it? So that when you say, people can define your leaning. And therefore, before that happens, or before that definition, of course, people will have different definitions on who you are. And I realized you can spend a lot of time fixing your politics, and you neglect the role at which you are actually elected to do. That's something profound that I learned in my first 2 years. That you can spend a lot of time trying to fix your competitor, trying to fix and follow where the person who may want your seat has gone to, trying to silence somebody maybe in social media or elsewhere, provoking you to do something better. Or you can actually choose to spend that time doing the work itself. And I realized it is very important that as a leader, you focus on something that can stand the test of time. Because, for example, when we have an argument with Dr. Rugo here, whom is also my good friend, if we have an argument here on words will not go past that argument. But if there is some deliverable, you do something tangible, it will go beyond the argument, it will go beyond words. And I realized that it is important you spend your time as a leader addressing the issues that are not necessarily things that you are proving through word of mouth, but things you'll do that are all seasonal. And these things that are all seasonal are the deliverables you do around the sectors that you should be working around. Why am I saying this? If you look at the budget alternative that has been done by IPF, and I commend Jiri for even the demeanor at which you highlighted the issues. If you look at it, and I want to be very frank, you have to make a choice as a country between managing politics and delivering. What am I trying to say? There is no better way of showing what you want to do other than through the budget allocations. Now, if what you want to achieve, for example, is roads, if what we want to achieve as a country is healthcare, if what we want to achieve is in education, then just follow the budget. Go check how much has been allocated. And therefore that will speak more than the words. Now, what I've seen, the state, the architecture of the state, beyond the doing, there is also the people management side. The people management side, of course, is done through that sector that was criticized by Bernard. That sector that has course, GJRO, and also there is the administration. I don't want to say more. Just scrutinize the budget. Because, for example, if you look at the supplementary budget we just did, there was a variation around administration again of over 10 billion shillings to one specific institution. Why am I saying these things? The orientation of a country, you need to define, we need to define. The orientation around the circumstances in Kenya now. Are the real issues around security and management of people, or is it in other areas, for example, like roads and other deliverables? You just need to look at the budget, you can tell. Why am I saying so? If, for example, you increase the budget, let me use interior, for example, and you see a significant increment, and in that year there is no recruitment that is happening, and if you go to the budget of the development of that specific ministry, there is no increment that is notable, therefore that money is going into recurrent, then you ask yourself, this money that is going into recurrent in sectors that are by law not as transparent as others, then you need to make your deduction around there. And I'm speaking that because I know I'm talking to experts. You scrutinize. So when the money is going here, if it's, for example, buying equipment that are security related, fine, which are they? But if it's going to recurrent, what is recurrent in that sector? And up to what length can you question that recurrent as a Kenyan? Up to what length can you question that expenditure as a journalist, for example? You'll get many answers from that. And I hope I am speaking. The other thing, because many times we confuse, budget making process is not just about June or whichever other date that the minister reads highlights. It starts pretty earlier. It starts many months before that date. And it goes all the way into oversight. And therefore, even IPF, I challenge you, some of the questions we are asking, I challenge you to also take it up. Because even, for example, if you look at KPIs, you look at the allocations, that's not the head of budget. Even what the Auditor General does is not the head of the budget. There is now what Park and Peak in Parliament, therefore, analyzes. I challenge you to also go the full length so that we also check at the outcome at the end of the tunnel. It starts from way early, but it also ends way after June. Let's be able to check also the after implementation. If we say we have built a classroom, for example, can you verify through sampling those kind of projects? So it starts early. And just for understanding, we divide the state into 10 sectors. And those 10 sectors incorporate several ministries. So when you see, for example, those sectors that are 10, all the ministries are condensed, or all government departments are condensed, including sagas, into those 10 sectors. The other thing I just want to highlight is that my experience as chairman of budget is not the one we read. This is the hard truth. The budget of Kenya is called exchequer. The budget is not the one we read. The one we read remains there. When you have a country where there is a discrepancy between what you budget for and how much you can raise as revenue. So what we budget for is not the budget. What you fund is the budget. When you are in a household budget and you have what you want to achieve, you want to build a house in Githurai, you want to build your rural home, you want to buy a car, that is what is the budget. Then after that, those are aspirations. What can you fund out of your revenue? That is the real budget. So the things that I was seeing some semantics about absorption. That word called absorption, you need to actually juxtapose it from absorption to not funded. Those nice words about absorption and absorption, it basically means more than 95% that those programs were actually not funded by the close of the financial year. Those words around absorption, the problem is that the responsibility is left with the accounting officer, the responsibility to explain. But the overarching ministry, which is the National Treasury, then is left with no responsibility. If you sit here and you're talking about an absorption, for example, in the Department of Basic Education, like the classrooms I saw in laboratories, if there is a CFO or the PS for basic education, they seem like the ones carrying the burden, that you didn't absorb the money yet it was budgeted. That is not the truth. The truth is that that program or those projects were actually not funded. So that I have seen part of managing our country's economics is communicating things as they are, so that people's expectations are aligned to what can be delivered and are aligned to what is possible. There are just a few other things I want to highlight. One is the budget. The budget that we know in terms of the expenditure side. If you could have followed the presentation here, BPS level 4.3 trillion. Let me use the one that has been implemented, because, and you forgive me for this because I've been there. The real budget is the one that has been implemented, not the one you want not the aspirations of the next financial year. And that comes in handy at the close of the financial year, when you realize there is a lot of gap in terms of revenue. Now let me actually use the one that has partly been implemented for this current financial year. And let me use the one before revision, before the second supplementary. You're talking about a budget of 3.8 trillion. I want you to see what it is that we budget for. Kenya has two very stagnant and solid polars in budget making. One is the side of discretionary, the other one is non-discretionary. As the institutions of the state continue to solidify, what usually happens is that the role of a leader gets diminished by the day. The role of budget making organs gets diminished the more institutions of governance continue to solidify. Let me try to explain this. In a country like Kenya that is doing fairly well in terms of having enough institutions around governance, that continues to decimate the role of decision making in resource allocation. Why? Majority of the huge proportion of our budget is actually non-discretionary. There is nothing you can do about it. So you are sitting there as the leader, championing or leading budget making, but up to what point can you exercise your mind? This is the reason. 3.8 trillion is there as your budget. You read it, is an astronomical figure, and it projects even growth in expenditure, etc. All those good semantics we put in the budget making process. But out of 3.8 trillion, you remove 1.25 to 1.3 trillion as something called consolidated fund service. I'm not using BPS, I'm using this current financial year. Out of that 1.25 trillion, over 1.08 trillion is money you are going to pay interest rates for debts. 1.008 trillion. It will be more next financial year. Now, there is nothing you can do about that. There is also nothing you can do about funding constitutional bodies and commissions, and there is nothing you can do about pension. All those falls under CFS. So you budget 1.2 thereabout trillion, there is nothing you can do about it. Then come to salaries of civil servants. Salaries of civil servants in Kenya is in the range of 600 to 700 in the few years around here now, 600 to 700 billion Kenya shillings. There is also nothing you can do about that. There is a constitutional requirement of funding counties to a tune of 380 billion that time, this financial year, actually without carryovers. Once you put carryovers, it is over 400 billion. There is nothing you can do about that also. So what happens then? We end up with a kitty we call development budget of around 700 billion, which over the years, as I said when I was starting, is just an aspiration. It is not a budget. It is an aspiration. Because you budget 700 billion, by the close of the financial year, you are less in revenue collection by 300 billion. You can't cut payment of interest rate. Neither can you cut any part of CFS. You can't cut salaries. There is a part you can't cut, for example, FPE. Part of recurrent, for example, is free basic education. There is nothing you can do about that. So what usually happens? When Treasury receives money, revenue, they fund all those things, other things as priority. The last one to be funded is development. So in that development then, it is the one that takes the hit and the cut when there is a downsize or a downgrade in revenue collection. So the room to exercise the authority of budget making process continues to be decimated. For me, in one way, it's a good thing, especially in regards to what this money goes into doing. But of course, as I wind up, I'll talk more about also the revenue side. Nachukua a few points here and there. I'm talking broadly, so please don't get lost in the mix. I'm just trying to be broad and general. This financial year, as you do the alternative budget, this and next, you'll likely see a lot of enhancement in GJ law, because maybe 1 year after today, or even months after today, we are likely to see a lot of activities around IEBC. It is a huge budget expectation there, because we are talking about around 60 billion Kenya shillings that must go into the instruments of democracy, into making sure you have a credible election in the year of election, which is not very far from today. Now, why have I picked just IEBC? Even with the challenges that there are in terms of funding the current budget, the budget we are likely to give IEBC during the electioneering period is actually more than the entire budget we give to the road sector in Kenya when you talk about development funded by GOK. So I want you to start exercising your mind around your expectations then. I have talked about non-discretionaries you can't do anything about. There is now another non-discretionary called IEBC that will take approximately 60 billion. So what is that doing? It continues to shrink what you may call political development. As an MP, as a politician, you may talk about all the other things. Before you talk about roads and water, you have not yet said anything about development. Because the people's expectation in terms of Kenya is around those areas. Let me say something about debt. If there is one threat that we face as a country today, it is debt. And I don't think we are taking the seriousness of this matter the way it should. And I also don't think those who are responsible are communicating enough about the problem we have about debt. When you are in a hole, there are many ways you can get out of that hole. You can get a ladder, You can get somebody to pull you from it. There are many ways. One of the ways you cannot get out of the hole is to continue digging that hole. You know, I just want you to reflect on the figures that we are projected here. You tell me whether Kenya continues to get out of the hole or to dig the hole further. And I think in terms of debt management, we have a lot of work to do as a country. And the government also has a lot of work to do around debt management. If you track debt from year 2003, especially during President Kibaki's time, he took up the country when the debt was around 600 billion shillings. By the time he left, it was around 1.8 trillion. But I want you to see the other side of it. When President Kibaki came in, revenue collection in Kenya was 200 billion. Can you just imagine how small a country we were? We were collecting only 200 billion in ordinary revenue. When President Kibaki left, that figure was around or close to 1 trillion Kenya shillings. So if you look at the debt growth, the debt grew from 600 to 1.8 trillion. That's around maybe 200% over and above. But look at the revenue collection. The revenue collection, with the growth was like double that of debt accumulation. And I want to say, because figures don't lie, you realize that the accolades given to President Mwai Kibaki, he actually deserves more. Because now we have comparisons to do. You know, when it was just President Kibaki's reign, there was no comparative analysis to do. Now he left in 2013. We can now do comparative analysis from then. And clearly you can see Kenya has never had a more prudent president than President Mwai Kibaki. And it is the same time we had very revolutionary expenditure lines like basic education funding and all the others that even beyond being good in terms of growth of the economy, they also are social investments because they enhance an egalitarian society. All of us here in this hall, I can bet over 80% will not be in this hall were it not for the reforms around education during that time or regime of President Mwai Kibaki. Why am I talking about that in this kind of standness? We are now talking about 10 trillion to 11 trillion depending on where the currency is, because 50% is denominated by a currency, not other currencies, not ours. Now, if you check our debt to GDP levels, and I want to agree with Bernard, this is what happens when you are making a budget. You have to address the issues in your country, but I have also seen we are not as sovereign as we purport to be. Developing countries are not as sovereign as it appears. Because when you are doing revenue raising measures, for example, some of those things are conditions from people you want to borrow money from. Without mentioning the exact ones, I can see in your faces you already know them. So, are we together? Ama nipuguze hii maneno ya economics kiasi. I'm looking for words for you to capture this point properly. I'm talking about debt. If you look at our debt level, 10 to 11 trillion, and I'm trying to solidify the point that was said earlier, you'll be given a condition about debt to GDP ratio. You'll also be given a condition around fiscal deficit to GDP ratio. If you notice there, GDP is cutting across both two parameters. So what do authorities do? Because the target is on a percentage. If I do 2 out of 10, 2 out of 10 is what? 2 over 10 is 20. 2 over 10. 2 divided by 10. What's that? 20%. Very well. What about when I do 2 out of 20? 10%. What have I changed? Have I changed? Is the 2 constant? What have I changed? What if my obligation was to lower the percentage? What do I need to do around the denominator? Now, ask yourself this. You report in the same government documents, the Kenyan GDP grew by 4.something%. That goes in the record. The same record shows the GDP moved from 16 trillion to 18 trillion. What is that percent? Can somebody do 16 out of 18? I mean, to do the math, when GDP moves from 16 to 18, what percentage is that? That is 2 out of 16. 12.5. Okay, they will argue one is real, the other one is nominal. You can even discount inflation out of it. So I want you to see, so that even as you work around the figures you work on as IPF and also the fourth estate, you are able to get the reality by yourself. Because if the economy has grown by 10%, then it should reflect also on the GDP side, which you calculate in, or you used to calculate the other parameters, but should also be the one reported by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and all the other government bodies. I hope I'm making sense. You don't need anyone to tell you the economy of Kenya grew by what percent. You can calculate it by yourself in nominal terms and in real terms, because you have all the parameters from public institutions. So the problem around our debt is that when we inflate our denominator, we continue to show like the economy grew with the purpose of having a leg room of borrowing more. The problem is that you cannot teach figures for too long. It catches up with you, and especially when it is time for repayment. Debt management is everything else. It catches you around repayment. Now, we are spending over 1 trillion Kenya shillings in paying our interest rates. Over 1 trillion Kenya shillings. Now, whether you inflate GDP or you condense it, that is actual money that actually have to be paid. That is where it catches you. Because you may come and say, you know, our fiscal deficit to GDP ratio is 5% or the next, or the other figure. That's fine, it goes to the books. It will catch up with you when it's time for repayment. The other things I want you to, I'm just provoking your mind so that you go research further. I saw headlines in our newspapers the other day in jubilation that we have done a very good thing, because in that year of 20, I think last year or thereabout, we were able to repay our Eurobond. And the people in this hall, because I can see you are able to dig deeper. You talk about in jubilation of having been able to pay the Eurobond of 2014. And it comes out as headline as a jubilation for the country. Now this is the reality. The reality is that you retire a debt of 6.8% with a debt of 10.3%. And then you clap and you want the whole country to be closed for people to celebrate. I'm provoking all of us here. I mean, Kenya is for all of us, and we need to speak these things as clearly as they ought. You cannot go and take a loan from Shylock, you pay a bank, and then you go home, and people should celebrate you for taking a loan with an interest of 20% to pay the one you had that you are paying 12%. Those are the things that will catch up with this country very soon. And by the way, with all honesty, if we do not become more prudent in the several months to come, we are likely to have a very big problem with our debt. Why? If in our revenue collection, over 40% is going into interest rate alone of debt obligations, what are we talking about? The other thing I want us to reflect on around debt, and the reason why this, and I'm challenging even those who are responsible in government to speak about it clearly, because part of this communication is important. You collect revenues of around 2.4 trillion shillings. You use over 1.2 trillion in paying interest rates of debt incurred. So that's 50% that you can do nothing about. Basically what we are doing as a country, the money we are borrowing in terms of PFM Act, you should be borrowing for development alone. But even by doing the math, even with a pencil, if we take our revenue collection, you remove CFS, you remove salaries, you're already in red. It means the money we borrow, some of it is for budget support, and clearly that money is for recurrent. You don't need to go very far. Just this data, just do the math around this data, even with a pencil, you'll get the correct figure. So this issue of debt, if we are not progressive enough and prudent enough as a country, in just a few months to come, we will see the ramifications. We do not want Kenya to be a case study like Sri Lanka in the year 2002, in the year 2022, 2023. The primary reason was debt. The issue around Zambia never descended too much because there was a new president who had to tell their country as it is, and they restructured, or they started or attempted to restructure. Ghana never had that luxury. They actually defaulted. Now, if you receive 2 shillings and 1 shilling is already going into interest rates of debt incurred in terms of interest rate, and the other shilling remaining cannot pay even the recurrent expenditure, I mean, there is work to be done there. And I'm saying it so that we provoke our mind, we think, not with the aim of just talking, but also providing a solution to it. Therefore, you must have seen sometime last week, I saw the National Treasury had put up some communication which was recanted very fast about a visit to China. Visits to China currently or other bilaterals, I can assure you, will be about debt primarily. Because we are almost at a cliff in terms of debt repayment, and especially interest rate. The problem is that when you go to your creditors to discuss about either rescheduling debt or working around new terms, what are you telling the markets? When I am here, I have borrowed 3 of you some money, 10,000, 12,000, 18,000. I have your money now, so you expect me to pay you. You see, as my sister there, I've already called my brother here to tell him, you know, I was to pay you this money, but forgive me, you may have to add me a few more months for me to pay you this money. What am I already telling you? As the other person, I owe money. I've already called you as a person who owes you money. I mean, najaribu kuodoa economy kwa hii maneno mingi. Martin is here. Dirango is there. And Veronica. I owe, all of you have lent me money. Veronica 12,000, Dirango 10, and Martin 18,000. Yani mumenikopesha. Munaelewa hiyo maneno? Niko hapa. Mati nako hapo ameona nimeita dirangu. Nimemwambia najua niko na pesa yako na nilikuwa nikulipe next month. Lakini sasa nataka tuongee. What comes to your mind as Veronica? Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Any talk you start around debt, changing terms, you already communicate to the markets. If you look at the figures, the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond, even as late as yesterday, you see changes there. Because markets operate on credible and fundamental information. When the market starts sensing that somebody owes you money, you're already talking to them, not asking them which bank account they should pay you through, but asking you, can we, tunaweza fanya, unipe miezi kidogo, kiasi nini. When they start seeing you already giving signals to one of your creditors that you want changes in terms, you are already communicating signals to the market. And those signals in the market is actually how countries then decide. Because what usually happens, when you give signals that you have problems with paying debt, the international market starts to sense you as somebody who may also change terms when they lend you money. So what do? They already input that risk in the interest rate they will charge you. That is why you see the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond is changing. Because when the creditors start seeing, you may start some stories sometime later in the future, they also price you accordingly. So they let you money fine, but you also pay a commensurate cost for it. Now the other thing I want you to look at is this. You can talk to China and they agree. China, you know, people imagine China is the number one lender to Kenya. No, that's not true. The Kenyan debt to Kenya, the Chinese debt to Kenya is actually less than 10%. It's only that Chinese debt is usually project finance, which is more expensive, and commercial. So they become more expensive. But there are some other parameters I provoke you to go and check. Out of our CFS, payments of interest rates of 1 trillion, approximately. 750 billion this current financial year. It is now over 800 billion. The one we budgeted was 750. I think it's now hovering around 800 billion by close of the year. But let me use 750. Please get this point. 1 trillion shillings is for payment of interest rate. 750 billion is for domestic debt servicing. So, external debt, we are talking about around 200 billion shillings. There is a point I want to derive there. Now, issues around talking about debt. You know, when I'm talking about debt, I'm talking about changing terms, because I am sure 100% we may end up there as a country. So when you talk about changing terms of debt, you may change externally. Now come now back home. 750 billion is the biggest ticket of payment of interest rate in our country, in our economy. Now, can you start thinking as a Kenyan what that is? Can you imagine a meeting being called by the National Treasury at some point? Like the way we are here, there is a meeting that has been convened. Nimewaita tuongee mambo ya hii deni. Sio kama wa Kenya, lakini wale watu wamekopesha serikali pesa. I want you to start seeing that conversation, what it means. The 750 billion Kenya shillings we are paying domestic interest rate is owed to who? Is owed to banks, is owed to insurance companies, is owed to bond holders, even normal Kenyans. Now, changing terms means what? Are you calling us to increase the yield? What is the likely conversation that is likely to be around there? It's about postponing paying you. That's number one. They can only be two things actually. Postponing paying you, that's number one, or paying you less. Now think about it this way. You are a bank. with shareholders expecting you to release results by end of the financial year. Huyo mtu anasema nini akikuita hiyo mkutano? In other words, those are the things that we need to think about, because the dominant thing we have to think about as a country is debt. And I can guarantee you, we can do all the other things correct. Any small indication that we are not able to service is catastrophic more than any other thing we are doing as a country. I think I leave that there. Mumeshika what I'm trying to say. And you know, they say restructuring is the first chapter of default, because the same analogy I gave, if I owe you money, 3 of you, and I've called you one to talk, what are we talking about? We are talking about, I may not pay you next month, I'll pay you 3 months from now. So I'm restructuring. So what if in those 2 months I've not paid you, what have I done? Haven't I defaulted? Now lastly, I want to talk about revenue. There is something called revenue maximizing tax rate. That is a term that should be given a department in the Department of the National Treasury. Revenue maximizing tax rate. You know, many times we confuse that you add tax rate, you get more revenue. It is a fallacy. At some point you get to Rafa's curve and it starts descending. That the more you increase, the more you distort economic decisions. So if I was to buy a car, I see you've already paying for my money, so I hold back that expenditure. Holding back that expenditure means even the retro you could have gotten, you'll not get it. That is something I have seen we have also to take very seriously as a country. So that even as we make tax policies and revenue policies, let's look, and it cannot be arbitrary. I mean, you cannot just sit down and say, now tunapeleka hii kodi hapa, you get more money. There has to be some research based on it. There has to be some thorough analysis based on it. There has to be thorough sampling. There has to be thorough work in it by coming up with a rate that maximizes revenue without making people distort their economic decisions or market to distort its decision making. We did the finance bill of 2023, which was fairly debated as the one for last year. Now, this is the most shocking thing. The Kenyan revenue to GDP ratio in the year 2023-2024 was around 16%. I want you to see the trend. In the year 2019-2020 was around 15%. In the year 2023, that year, was 14-point-something%. In this current year, up to date, it is around 14.7%. Now, when you do robust revenue-raising measures in terms of policy, they should come with commensurate revenue from it. Kodi ikiongezewa, for example, pay, there should be commensurate revenue in the basket of revenue from this money you have taxed. Tunashikana hapo. Why is it that even when you raise the rate, then in the basket of money, there is not that money? Why is it that the revenue growth in Kenya never noticed finance bill of 2023? That the graph, if you are given a graph without labeling, you will not pinpoint those 2 years. You will not see them. Because the revenue never changed other than the ordinary changes it usually has. I'm talking about that analysis of revenue maximizing tax rate. Why is it that even when we have a very corrosive, when we have a very debatable policy around tax and it passes, why is it that we cannot see this money in the other side? Possibly this could be the reason. You come, maybe you are earning some money here, the government takes it at the payee level. Napenda kuita unakatia stima kwa transformer. You know, when money is deducted from your payee, ni kama stima imekatiwa kwa transformer. So it actually never reaches your hands. Now, when you cut money from the payee level, when you cut money at that level, let's say in my disposable income, you already knock off 8,000 shillings from it. That is the money you are sending your uncle somewhere in Nyamira. That is the money you are sending your auntie somewhere in Kisii. Now, you no longer send them that money. So they no longer buy that sugar they were buying through the transfer you are doing. So you have cut money here at the payee level, but the same money denies you correction at the VAT level. Those are some of the things we have to work around, so that even as we increase taxes, then we are not handicapping the same revenue collection. There is another thing I want to talk about very briefly, which you have to be vigilant as a country. In Nigeria is one of the economies, by the way, which are very good. It has very rich people in terms of, in Africa, you only get black billionaires, majority of them being domiciled in Lagos, Nigeria, out of Nigerian money. Now, Dangote cement, BOA cement, they grew around what? You come and put in some duty for imports of the commodities they manufacture, primarily cement. By that time, when you put duty on cement, I'm using Nigeria, you end up having a big conglomerate and several of them. Number one, of course, we know Dangote cement, BOA cement, there is also Lafarge and the others. So now you cut off imports. It's a good thing, fine. The question is, for how long? You cut off, cutting off meaning you build a wall of tariff, not necessarily a non-tariff barrier, but a tariff one. So you put in a wall. This wall should incentivize this local production to be efficient, so that their products can compete with the global ones. But then you overstay with that policy. So Nigeria, by beginning of this year, had the highest cement prices in Africa. Can you see that oxymoron? The biggest producers had the highest cement prices in Africa and had the highest cement margins almost in the world. You protect an industry that must come in with an analysis for how long, and there should be government follow-up on when we protect you, up to when can Kenyans continue to pay more for you to get efficient. Because I am here as a consumer in Kenya. The cement prices in Kenya today have gone up. So what am I doing as a Kenyan buyer of cement? I am actually subsidizing as a Kenyan the production of the producer of cement. I am paying a higher price. It is a good thing. It may end up employing many more Kenyans. But the reason for protectionism must not be for longevity of production in this company. It should be up to the point where this company gets competitiveness in competing with any other cement from any other country. If I can import cement, let's say from Mozambique, I'm just using an abstract example, or from South Africa. If I can import a bag of cement from South Africa and it gets to Taita Taveta at a lower price than the cement being produced several kilometers away from that place, I mean, that's also a paradox. Protectionism all along must not be for the benefit of the producer. It must be for the benefit of the economy. And that is why it has to be time-bound. Very lastly, some of the things I think we should do as a country. Number one is to take institutional reforms very seriously. If you look at the regression of economic growth from China, from all the other countries, institutional reforms takes up a sizable influence on the dynamics of economic growth. Sio kupaka mafuta. You know, in Kenya we come rebrand an agency and we call it institutional reform. We need to be very deliberate. Institutional reform must incorporate the size of government. Kenya can act optimally with half of the government we have in terms of its size. We can cut the government into half across everything. Government, if government is a loaf of bread, you can cut it by half. All the resources of government, you can cut it by half, and my grandmother will not notice. What am I trying to say? That service delivery will not be hampered. Institutional reform must be deliberate and must be objective. The other thing, the Eurobond we borrowed, for example, the one I talked about, 10% to retire the 6.8%, we borrowed alone 30% higher price to pay another one. I wish we did a few things instead of borrowing more. Kenya has got assets. And some of these assets, we bought them for commercial purpose alone. Government invests in institutions for many factors, strategic reasons. There is also commercial reasons. In the year 2020, Safaricom market capitalization was around 1.5 trillion Kenya shillings. 1.5 trillion. The government of Kenya owns 35% of Safaricom. 20% of that Safaricom at the market cap then of 1.5 trillion is 300 billion. Only 30% alone. You could have raised 300 billion without borrowing anything. But some people will argue, but you know, why would you sell it? It gets dividend. I mean, even in the investment arena itself, you take the amount of money the government cumulatively has received in dividends. It may need to receive dividends for hundreds of years for it to match this kind of investment. The other thing people talk about, you can't sell a company like Safaricom. You know, it holds very strategic reasons for our country. Which strategic reasons cannot be handled? And that regulator can hold the forte of government there. You can even have a regulation that the government will have board of directors without necessarily even having a shareholding. You can have it. Just as currently the CBK forces banks, you must have independent directors. The government will not own your bank, but they'll force you, you have to have independent directors. Government can still control companies through regulation. You don't have to control companies through ownership and stake. Now, this is the thing. Now, that market capitalization of Safaricom has now come down from 1.5 trillion to 700 billion as of yesterday. We must be strategic even in government investments so that we make it, we have an efficient asset management arm of government so that they are able to make optimal decisions. Why would you go to borrow money as a government? Private sector investment. For you to invest, you are not hungry. You are okay. You are not maybe even Kenyan. So you have a home by the beach. You have money. I want to ask a rhetorical question. Between this person who has 10 billion shillings, them they are okay, they have a house, they are able to take care of themselves, but they have 10 billion, they want to invest in Kenya. Is this person doing Kenya a favor, or is it Kenya doing them a favor? You are fine. Wewe uko na gari yako, hata uko na ndege, unakaa ng'ambo, you are not even Kenyan. You live in the most exotic places and you have money and you want to invest. So you are not looking for money to buy food. You are actually looking for money just as a creation of wealth. And you have some money to put up a factory somewhere and you say, so it is in Kenya. And when, or any other developing country, when you come in with this money and you are investing in Kenya, somebody want to treat you like helping you is a favor they are doing you. Entrepreneurs, if they are given the primacy of the role that should be given to them, they can do much of the work that the government already does. And therefore take up some more roles from government, for government to concentrate on just a few. If you look at, for example, the R&D budget of Amazon, it is bigger, research and development, it's a big budget in developed countries. The R&D budget of Amazon is higher than the R&D budget for the entire Germany. Germany as a country has a lower R&D budget than Amazon as a country. Just imagine if Amazon was not there. The R&D budget of Meta, for example, and maybe only two tech companies in the US combined, is higher than the entire R&D budget of the government of the United States. What am I trying to say? There are some things that are already being funded by the private sector in that country where the government does not actually need to have that money in their fiscals. Because the ultimate result of R&D is research, is to do things more efficiently, is to do things better. If private sector is given enough resources, enough support, they can end up doing much more of what the government does. Asanteni sana.
All right, thank you very much for the economics class, Honorable NDINDI. That was very useful. I hope you have all enjoyed. We now want to move to the last step of this launch. Just play that short video, and then we can move forward to the rest of the day. Please indulge us in the next couple of minutes. Well, this was supposed to happen to some of us here, so we can make our way here. Yeah, thank you. Right, is it? Oh, it's still going on? Okay.
Every year, a national budget is tabled, promises are made, numbers are crunched, but beneath the numbers, what do the figures mean for you? In this 5th edition of the annual National Shadow Budget, we have crunched the numbers and highlighted the following. We note that Kenya has remained resilient in the face of domestic civil unrest and external shocks. However, revenue shortfalls continue to hamper fiscal consolidation efforts. High interest payments on debt have contributed to high debt fragility and the risk of high debt distress. The question that lingers is, how will the government finance the 4.3 trillion shillings budget in the coming year? The government has proposed some reforms, but challenges persist. Firstly, the government has emphasized the entrenching of a zero-based budgeting approach. We wait to see how this shift will influence government spending decisions. Second, the urgent and critical clearance of national government pending bills amounting to 540 billion shillings is necessary to ease cash flow pressures on the private sector. Third, the persistent duplication of functions across national and devolved governments and with national government entities demands rationalization. Fourth, Declining foreign aid, especially to the health sector, has left a funding gap of 28 billion shillings. This creates the need for innovative financing and resource optimization. Lastly, there has been reorganization and merging of parastatals, and it is imperative to assess how these realignments affect budget execution, staff deployment, and service delivery. We call upon all citizens to interact with the analysis and oversight institutions, especially Parliament, to leverage on these insights presented when considering the budget proposal. Kindly visit our website on www.ipfglobal.or.ke and download your copy of the annual National Shadow Budget.
One more round of applause as we appreciate our chief guest, as we celebrate the publication that is now accessible and available for all of us. So I would like to welcome Sarita to just take 1 minute for a vote of thanks, and then we'll request our guest to just hold on for a few minutes for photo ops, then we will close the meeting.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Sarita Ikenye, and I serve as the Programs and Operations Associate at the Institute of Public Finance. And I'm just honored to give the vote of thanks on behalf of IPF this morning. And first and foremost is to just thank each and every one of you for joining us to witness the launch of our 5th edition of the annual Shadow Budget. Not only have you graced this event, but your presence also reaffirms the value of evidence-based dialogue in shaping Kenya's public finance. So just to mention the people in the room, our distinguished guests, Honorable NDINDI NYORO, MP Kiharu Constituency, Member of Budget and Appropriations Committee, Mercy Mwangi, the Executive Director of KEWAPA, our sector experts, who I will just name one of them, Stephen Jaramba, Engineer James Murage, Jean Kambuni, John Nyangi, Dr. Patricia Nyukabi, Francis Xavier, Dr. Vincent Ngeno, Dr. Aaron Thegea, Janet Ouko. Thank you so much for that. Our partners, Bajeti Hub, World Vision, Christian Aid, ASNET, TISA, Oxfam, Henet, members of the Fourth Estate, fellow IPF colleagues, friends of IPF, thank you all for being here this morning, and just thankful for your unwavering commitment to transparency, accountability, and inclusive governance. I also want to thank the Hyatt Regency Hotel for just creating this space for us so we can engage in such a powerful conversation. So thank you all for coming and for being here. We ask that we can move to the photo session just over here. And yes, I think there's still breakfast being served. So have a good day and God bless you all.
Nitaitoa kabisa. Hizo sijui ni za nani. Oh, kumbe hii ni hawa watu.